I'm kidding. Alrighty, Privet, Katila, Wanengruski Desu, and today I am extremely excited, and I'm sorry for hurting Endeavor's ears with my poor Russian, but I'm here with some of the greatest people on to discuss one of the greatest topics. Well, it's not great; it's a very serious topic. It's something I've been thinking about. A lot of the members here have discussed it in their own ways. And I wanted to have this discussion on the authentic life, and what it means to live one, a fulfilled, authentic life, and how the modern world exactly doesn't bring about that authentic life, how it leaves us into this atomized, rootless world, how we could get out of that hole, and what is the purpose of us in this political sphere to bring about that, where individuals within a society can live fulfilled, meaningful lives. So, without further ado, so I've had two people on my channel before, Clossington and Endeavour. Before we start, I'm sure everyone who's watching probably knows one way or another who you guys are. But if just a little background and describe who you guys are and what's like your political ideology, just like what do you do with your YouTube channel, basically? What's your purpose of it?
Do you want to go clockwise or?
To be honest, whoever wants to go first could go first, but
just go. You talk first.
Clossington, you're on the floor.
Oh, all right. I kind of come from a post-libertarian background. I went down ye old pipeline, and I created this little YouTube channel as sort of a way of expressing, I guess, the developments I've made over the last couple months, couple years. My channel is mostly devoted towards discussing historical events, political theory, and a little bit of philosophy. I'd like to describe myself as something of a neo-reactionary with a strong paleo-libertarian sort of background. I have not gone full pipeline quite yet, but I'm getting there, and I'm quickly rising through the ranks. I'm the smallest guy here, but I hope I can prove that I have something of value to all of you guys watching.
You sure will. You always make some great content, Clossington. Endeavour, you'll go next.
I'm Endeavour. I have a YouTube channel. I generally discuss neo-reactionary thought, and I look at things like culture, history, metapolitics, and various things like that. I guess I made a video earlier on this subject. I hope I can remember what I said in the video because it was a pretty long one. But yeah, it's a topic I'm interested in. So it should be interesting.
All right, and Charlemagne, you have the floor.
Yeah, so I also went through the pipeline, as we say, over the last 4 years, maybe from the sort of default liberal position that Breitbart described to neo-reactionary, I would consider myself. And basically, the point of my channel is just to dig up some neo-reactionary deep lore, put it into a sort of condensed format that people can consume easily and share, and try to expose some of these useful ideas that have developed on the right over the last decade or so that people might not be aware of.
Sweet. And lastly but not leastly, Settlers Lament.
Yeah. Hey guys. I'm somewhat similar. I used to be some sort of mix between boomer conservatism and libertarianism, and I slowly drifted away to that over the past couple of years. And yeah, I just launched my channel a couple, 4 or 5 months ago, probably. And you all should subscribe. Yeah, I talk a lot of similar sort of stuff, mostly metapolitics, and history. But yeah, that's mostly it.
Sweet. So what as I think everyone has seen, all of us have come through a sort of political journey. And I think for one way or the other, we realize that the current, at the very least, our society, but even within our individual selves, I think what brought us upon this political journey is there was a sense of we might not be able to pinpoint it, but I think we all kind of feel like there's something missing. There's something that things could be run much more better than they are now, and there's something wrong with the current way things are. So I guess I'm kind of stuck between where I think we should start either describing what's wrong with the current modern realities, or we should start, I guess, just playing out what it means, just right there. What does it mean to live fully fulfilled, meaningfully, and etc. In your guys' opinion, where should we start?
I think we should probably start with, I guess, what we think the problem is.
Yeah. Awesome.
I guess we can address that.
Okay, so now the reason why I started the stream is because I saw a video from Endeavour. So I think I'll give it to Endeavour, and we'll go around describing. And in this around, I want you guys to describe you could go deeply into your personal lives, explain why you brought about, what you felt that brought you to the realization that there was something unfulfilling, and then you could go also on a broader societal about the whole Western civilization in terms of its overall decline and its authenticity and meaning and all that. So you guys could describe personally and more societal aspects as well. So in your guys' opinions, starting with Endeavour, what is wrong with our current reality?
Well, I'd say for me, my disillusionment with it came in my teenage years, and I guess it was not really from like any bad experience I had, like per se. It was more just I found the wider society just really vacuous and lacking any kind of meaning. That was, I think, what really set me at least at first towards the right, and then eventually towards where I am right now. And I thought of this question earlier because I thought of, a lot of us can point out the problems of modernity, but I thought, well, what are the things that actually make me happy? What are the things that make me feel fulfilled? And I just felt like a lot of those things were really missing it from wider society. The lockdown that we're in, not that I want to talk about coronavirus all night because everyone's sick of that. I find that myself, and probably true for everyone here, we've been sitting in our rooms maybe for a long time, probably watching a bunch of Netflix or something like that, using social media. And it seems like it's an extreme form of the societal direction we're really going in. We're kind of going in this like more atomized, more isolated society, and I guess that's kind of why I just kind of found it depressing. And I did a video earlier on the film WALL-E, and I thought that was a really good illustration of an inauthentic life, in which it presented a world where all the people's material needs were fulfilled. They had all the material wealth and comfort in the world, but they were living a completely empty life because spiritually there was nothing for them. So I'd say that's kind of where I'm coming from on why I think the modern world is inauthentic.
All right. And I think there's a between WALL-E and I was going to hit upon it. I think we would all agree that in the current globalized world that we might have more material stuff. I mean, hell, all this new technology, all this type of stuff, we might be better off in terms of materially. We could get food and water and everything we want. And we don't have to be plagued by all these diseases. I mean, obviously coronavirus, but that's if we get cut in the finger, we're not going to die. But, we might be better off like in a material sense. But I think, a lot of people think that, well, they look at, where there's more people living in a democracy, there's more people having longer lifespans, and they think that things are just going progressively better. So I think one thing we should address is why, just because we're materially getting better, that doesn't necessitate that the immaterial things are getting better.
I think what you're talking about is what Ted Kaczynski's called surrogate activities and the power processes. Essentially, what do you do once you're not living to what happens when you're not living subsistently from day to day? What happens when the Faustian man has successfully conquered nature? and conquered his material conditions. What does Saint George do after he slays the dragon and rescues the woman? He has to have something else to do. He has to go on conquering more dragons. But what is it ultimately for? We kind of ran out of threats, and this is one of the main themes of someone like Carl Schmitt, who makes the point that the whole point of liberalism is addressing the very liberalism is great at addressing the material threats, but it doesn't exactly leave you with anything spiritually to do after you vanquish the threats.
Yeah, and I would add to this on a personal note, as someone who's gone from, very low class at birth to properly middle class, I would say that the material benefits of such are pretty minimal in terms of my happiness level. And the thing that really matters the most is, I would say, the accomplishment or victory in of itself, rather than the specific material benefits. And I've seen a lot of people around me that I've grown up with advance in various ways throughout their life, and I don't find that those who happen to earn more money, I don't find that they're particularly more spiritually fulfilled. In fact, in some ways, I would say even less so. So I have found in the lives of myself and people I know that there's very little correlation between material success and real happiness. And most people I know seem to seek material happiness, but there doesn't seem to be any end to that path for me. I don't think it's really achievable. It seems very empty, and it seems like they're trying to what is the term? Ghost dancing, I believe. They're trying to emulate some
that's
past American dream. Yeah, they're trying to emulate this conception of how you're supposed to be happy. That's sort of part of the boomer truth regime, as it's been called. And that just doesn't seem workable to me. I don't think I've known a single person who's achieved happiness simply by making money and buying nice stuff and a nice house.
In fact, to piggyback what Clossington and Charlemagne said, there's been if you look at people who got tons of money, people who win the lottery, their life's just completely crashed, because what happens is that they might have everything they need, but then what they realize is that as Charlemagne said, I think there's there's a study done that while the more money you make, that does not necessitate more happiness. Arnold Schwarzenegger, he said that, I'm worth $52 million, and last year I was worth $51 million. I'm worth $1 million more, but I'm no more happy than I am now. That might sound, counter, if we got $1 million, we might seem happy, but I think it's the instant, maybe at that moment, if someone just hands you $1 million check, you might be, oh, this is great, but it's not going to give you lasting happiness. I think that's what we're missing in the modern world, is that a lasting happiness. We might be able to a lot of people are trying to get that happiness through a very short time span. They want to, smoke weed or have casual sex. They think this will bring them some sort of something to fill up their empty hearts, but it's not something that could eternally fill out, something that could last long term. And to pick off of what Clossington said, for me personally, the biggest fear in my life is what do you most fear? Is it might sound cliche, but I want to live life, not just exist. And the biggest thing I always had back when I was 13, 12 years old, when I started thinking about these types of things, I was thinking, I don't want to just go to college and then go to my job and then just work in this corporate wage slave thing. I want to live. And I think I think everyone has that sort of, they don't want to just exist in this and just go through the motions. Clossington mentioned this before we started live streaming, that he's going through the days are starting to bleed together. And I experienced that when I didn't really have a purpose to it. And I think fundamentally, when we don't have a purpose, when we don't have a thing we're striving towards, eventually you're just kind of just sloshing it through with no end in sight. And then that's kind of what brings about, I think, a sort of nihilism. So just to talk for Clossington and Charlemagne, and then we'll go to Sellers Lament. Explain, I guess, in your personal lives. Charlemagne kind of hit on it a little bit, but you guys could also go a little bit more deeper if you want on.
Yeah, I definitely can.
Alrighty.
So on what you said there, I found one of the interesting things I've noticed during the whole lockdown period is that it's kind of given you time to introspect on yourself and observe your behaviors. And I've noticed how deeply ingrained within myself the consumerist culture is, because I knew one of the risks during this time period would be the impulse to just buy things out of sheer boredom, right? Like, oh, I'm bored, let me just go find something to buy. And I've talked to some of my friends about this, and they've experienced the same thing. In fact, I wasn't even the one who brought it up in our discussion. And it's interesting that there seems to be this universal impulse to just buy stuff just because you can, basically, in modern culture. And I think that is, in some sense, people trying to find something in the world that can give their lives meaning. And it's been really interesting for me to, I guess, observe and control that impulse. I've really noticed how much the stuff has been drilled into us, just having to sit inside so long and not really having anything to do, but still having access to this full this full platter of the world where I could just pick and choose whatever I want from it. And I imagine that it's really destructive, I think, to a lot of people, because I think it does require a lot of self-control to avoid just buying things you don't need in the modern world.
I actually, I'm going to be honest. I actually went through exactly what you're describing, Charlemagne. I was like, I think it's kind of hard for us because, when you, at least in the modern society, you could buy, all these corporations provide you all the food you need, all the drinks you want, all the entertainment you need. And you could just, you don't actually have to like go outside with your rifle and like hunt, to get food. You don't have to do that. And, people are like, well, if I don't, and I think it was Clossington that mentioned it, is that it's, and that about from Ted, what he described, that, we conquered everything. And now that you don't have to do it to get your food, to get your water, to get all these resources, all those to fulfill your, at least the baseline instincts, you don't actually have to work hard for it. And I know this sounds like a libertarian type of thing to say, but like, for me, it's a personal philosophy of mine that only through hell will we find heaven. The meaning of that sentence is that the things that actually bring about a fulfillment, like when you achieve something, it's not that moment of you getting like your award, or you finally completed this book, or whatever you set your mind towards, whatever goal it is. The reason why you feel so fulfilled is because all the hard work that you put in, and all the sweat and tears you put in, all the hours you toil to make that happen. And I think fundamentally we became. I was watching a show from a history show from Dan Carlin about Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul.
Mm-hmm.
And he described, at least Julius Caesar described, that the Gauls were getting very more mushy because they were so close to Roman civilization, and he specifically pointed out wine. And they were getting conquered by their Germanic neighbors who just weren't anywhere near civilization. They just raided and pillaged. And the Gauls they were weak because they didn't have the strengths of like a fully civilized society, but they didn't have the ferociousness strength. And I think what's happening in a liberal, at least in this society, is that we're becoming, I don't want to sound like Darwinian, but like, not like we're becoming, not like we don't have to be strong to actually get the baseline things to get fulfilled out. Because, like back in the day, people like, oh, I hunted, I got food for my family, and then that's what gave them fulfillment. But now we got everything to us. We were given everything. I mean, not given everything, but it's just so easy to get at all these baseline instincts that I think that we're losing the sense of meaning that came about from actually providing for like your family or a community in the past.
Yeah, I will say that. Oh,
I was going to say that's sort of it's a very, very Western way of looking at the causation of the problem. It's not that you're necessarily receiving something; it's that you don't actually appreciate it. Mm-hmm. On my last stream with Charlemagne, Academic Agent, and Survive the Drive brought up how in Japan, or in a lot of these pagan cultures, but Japan in particular, has they have the Shinto concept of the kami. Pretty much every element of nature is imbued with the supernatural, the spiritual. Everything has an essence to it that has to be respected. And you see this in a lot of the Studio Ghibli films. I'm not trying to weeb out, but I'm just saying in more pagan cultures, you see that there is a spirit in nature, and when you abuse that nature, you are losing a very, very valuable part of the self. And I remember, I don't remember which video it was, but I remember seeing a video in which someone compared the relationship medieval people had with dragons, whereas in the East, the dragon is this mystical and untouchable concept that is a symbol of something much larger. But in the West, it's seen as an obstacle to be overcome. You know, you have Grendel being overcome by Beowulf. You have St. George defeating the dragon. You have the ancient Greek heroes defeating the supernatural monster. This founding civilizational myth of overcoming, I think it's deeply flawed, and it inevitably leads to something like materialism, something like that.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say was that what someone had pointed out is that liberalism seems to justify itself in that it creates material wealth. It's very utilitarian, and it provides, comfort, and which, according to the utilitarian argument, really is that it provides happiness. But that's really not the case. What you see in basically every human society is there's always been a drive for something transcendental. So even if you look back at some really primitive societies that really didn't have nearly the material wealth that we did, if someone was only driven by utilitarianism, then they wouldn't have things like the arts. They wouldn't have things like religion. They wouldn't have like things like culture and stuff like that. But that was very important to them, even though materially they were really not as well off as we are. There's always been this drive for people to experience something transcendental, and liberalism really doesn't have any answers for that. Like, there's no answer under liberalism for why people enjoy art. There's no answer for what is beautiful and what's not beautiful. There's no answer for why people hold value in their communities or in nationhood or anything like that. It just breaks everything down to the material. But when you look at human society, that really isn't how it's worked, and that really isn't how people have lived fulfilling. That's not really how people have lived fulfilling lives throughout human history. And I just think it's a question that really needs to be asked, because what you're seeing today is that there is really no striving towards anything transcendental. It does seem to be a purely materialistic society.
I want to this is the biggest, I think once we're going to move on to eventually to what exactly, what's the philosophical underpinnings of why we're seeing these declines. I'm going to be a bit premature and actually say, because you mentioned it, is the way I see it is it's this radical libertarianism is that everything has to mean something for you. Like, it can't just be that, there is something big beyond just the material pleasures and beyond yourself. Like a bunch of libertarians I see, or at least people whose ideology is like that, they're like, well, you see, we wouldn't want to be atomized because selfishly we don't want to be that. It's like, that's not for example, your family. If you live with your, say, grandmother, you're not like, well, selfishly, I think that, allowing her to be with me is like making me happy. That's not what you think. That's like, if you do that, you're an asshole, and you think more beyond, when you think about your family, your friends, you're not like, well, I'm with my friends because, they bring me happiness, or it's not all about you. It's just that it's it's something beyond that. It's the, friendship and, our family, it's love. And, it's not just the selfish, or, if you have a girlfriend or a wife, it's not like, well, I love her because it's only what I get out of it. so I think it's a very selfish way of looking at it. I think that's why I think one of the biggest things we have to, as Endeavour said, is bring back bigger, like more immaterial things, bigger things that you can't really concretely touch, but they actually are the things that bring about the most fulfillment in a person's life.
Yeah, those are some interesting points, and I've definitely noticed personally in people I know, and this actually makes me a bit uncomfortable at times, is that often the connections we have with one another tend to be a lot more about just how you can get the most pleasure for yourself out of it, rather than sort of the transcendent value of our communal connection to each other itself. And this makes me uncomfortable because this is kind of how I view my friendships. Is it's not just about me enjoying myself being around them, but there's a sort of like metaphysical aspect to the long-term connection we have to each other, and that's actually a lot more important than my personal pleasure. And for that reason, I would make sacrifices for the group. And it sort of actually bothers me that I'm not sure that my friends necessarily view me and the others the same way. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, no, exactly. You're trying to. Aristotle mentioned that there's 3 types of friendship. There's the friendship based on utility, basically like, you base your friendship based on how useful the other person is to you. The second is a friendship based on pleasure, how much happiness and whatever. And then the third is, he calls it the true authentic friendship, where it's very hard to describe but it's basically like you guys are friends with, you don't have to like, get a purpose out of, that friend. It's just a friendship that goes beyond just, the utility and pleasure. It's, you guys could, it's like this immaterial bond that you guys have, and you guys don't have to like find a reason for that.
Actually, that reminds me too of, I think, of an even more important point. One thing I see on the right a lot is, if I talk about my friends, and a lot of them are just default normies, basically, right? And people question how I can be friends with like liberals and progressives and stuff. But this question bothers me a lot because to me, I mean, unless they're like a really nasty person because of their political beliefs, our connection transcends all of this, and it doesn't really matter that they have different political views. To me, that the fact that we've been together for, in some cases, 20 years, I can't just drop them because we disagree on politics or something really low level like that. And I think that attitude on our side of things is discomforting as well, because I think it's the same mindset where you're looking at sort of the individual I guess pleasure or utility you can get out of the friendship rather than something higher.
Rusky, you brought up a little while ago that it's sort of this libertarian mindset of the atomized libertine. I think it much more has to do with the concept of liberation as a good end in and of itself. Liberating yourself from the constraints of the community in order to fully actualize the individual rather than, I guess, the holistic group. It's the lack of telos, just to bring it back to Aristotle, the lack of genuine organic hierarchy rather than your type 1. What was the Aristotelian for the first Aristotelian relationship? It's
a friendship based on utility. The second is a friendship based on pleasure, and then the third is the authentic friendship.
Yes. The fact that if you fully eliminate the first 2 and live out your life as a utilitarian who only sees materialism rather than metaphysics, you end up with atomization and the loss of community, the loss of in-group preferences, the loss of I guess perspective, because instead of the earth and your community being the center of your metaphysical universe, you are just some little amoeba on this flying rock who's just off center of the galaxy's center. It's the loss of perspective. I think that's what it is.
And we're going to go straight. I agree with you. I was just pointing. I think that's just one of the things I was just pointing off of Endeavour. Before we go into that topic about what are the pinnings that lead to this sort of atomization, I want to go to Sellers' Lament to lastly to discuss on his view on why we and I guess like a personal anecdote from him as well, if he wishes to explain his view on the authentic, on what he sees wrong with the current world and why it's not as fulfilling, even though we have all this material stuff.
I don't know. I mean, the whole I'm pretty black-pilled, generally speaking. The whole modern world is just disgusting. But I actually one I think sort of good example of the dichotomy that you guys were talking about before, that despite our material wealth, we still have these spiritual problems. Is that depression and suicidality are actually tend to be significantly more common in more educated and wealthier countries than less educated countries, and even within more educated countries, those problems tend to be more common among the wealthier and more educated people within those countries. So if you want to kill yourself, that's a pretty good example. That's a pretty good that's a pretty good measurement that there's something pretty wrong, and that shows that the sort of problems that we have, that it doesn't matter how high our GDP gets, it's not going to fix these issues. And I mean, the answer we get from a lot of leftists is like, oh, we just need more money to spend on mental health programs. I'm not saying mental health programs are bad. I'm sure they can do lots of good. But like that's kind of missing the point. Like, if Japan has like sky high suicide rates compared to like any other country in the world, it's not because they're not spending enough money on like counseling programs. It's clearly something much deeper with how society is run. And I think a core reactionary critique I know Moldbug talked about and other people is that the reason that that we're able to have the sorts of problems that we have in modernity is because of our material wealth. In any prior civilization, we would have just collapsed, but the material wealth that we have allows us to persist despite these gaping problems that continue to get worse and worse. But we're able to just kind of throw money at it, pretending it's less of an issue than it really is.
To me, I kind of put it as like, all these spending on mental health is like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. Like, you're not going to fix the problem by like, putting like short, you could put people on medications and like have them talk to counselors, but fundamentally, piling them up with pills isn't going to fundamentally solve, the problem of that's underlying it all. And so I guess what we could move on to your guys is, we'll start with Endeavour. What do you think is some philosophical ideals that we've touched upon a few of them, but like what's exactly leading to these problems that we see, the inauthentic, the meaning, like people not having a purpose or having roots, or all these things are happening that we described. Why is that happening? What's the philosophies?
I guess one thing that you see is kind of the commodification of everything. Oh, sorry.
No, I was chuckling because I was thinking the exact same thing.
Oh yeah, the commodification of all life, and kind of what you guys had brought up earlier, the friendship that's really based on what you can get from them. I guess that would be kind of like the commodification of relationships. It just seems like it just makes everything transactional. When I look at things like globalism and the political agendas that are going on today, which we criticize all the time, what seems to be behind it is the maximization of essentially consumption, really, and that the entire society they're creating is one that's geared towards facilitating production and consumption and in perpetuity. So what it really creates is a life in which you can only really the only way for anyone to the only thing they're really motivated by is that continuous consumption. But I like I had mentioned earlier, I do think that inside kind of inside the human soul, there is something that there is a longing for things that are transcendental, and I guess they'd be missing out on things that are it'd be missing out on transcendental things. A model that I've looked at it before, and it has its flaws, I'll admit it, but is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what it tries to break down is what really motivates human action. And what he says is that once humans are fulfilled, once they have their material wealth fulfilled, their material needs, their physiological needs, and then like that they have security, so they're not in like physical danger. They long for things like for relationships. Maslow claims that after they have their physiological and their security needs, they have social needs. So things like family, relationships, friends, community, and such. And then what he says after that is that they long for status. They long for achievement. Not necessarily money, but the feeling that they are a respected person. And what he puts at the very top of his pyramid is the feeling of self-actualization. That's like the final stage of human need, according to Maslow. That they want to feel like they've become the best that they are. And it's an imperfect model, but at the same time, I think that at least for the individual, because it is an individualistic model, I do admit that, but I'd say that the society today it can provide the bottom two needs very well, but then above that, it really doesn't seem to be able to provide provide anything above that.
And I think what we'll also discuss is, I think it's not just as you mentioned, it's like the commodification of a lot of these. As I think we also mentioned it beforehand too, that it's just what is it in it for me? And I think it's a lot of like a lot of the civilizational nihilism, I think, is brought about by, because what happens when you have because I think back in the day, when it, like as Endeavour mentioned with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is that maybe back in the day, all you needed was, hey, I found a deer that I could share with my family, and I hunted it like for 7 hours all day, and then I finally got it, and I found a river nearby. Great, now I could like provide, get something fulfilled. You got fulfilled from getting a deer killed. But that's like nowadays that we have all this. We could get satisfy those basic needs, but I think there's a lot of in the modern world, we've deconstructed what used to bring about these relationships and these communal because I think the fundamental is through like John Locke's his social contract theories, that, and Rousseau's like man was born free but is put in chains. I think this is what permeates through Western society, is that we're in this society, and the family that you're in, the expectations of. I had a to derail. I was having a conversation with Foreign for Conservatism. He's a national conservative. He mentioned that a lot of this is like, for example, we were talking about marriage, and when you talk about marriage, that requires a lot of duties, a lot of responsibilities. Isn't that, like, in a way, in a Rousseau type of way, why would you want to get married? Why would you want to have children? That's a chain you're putting upon yourself. And me and him were discussing how basically that it's actually not enslavement. It's actually that's actually what brings about fulfillment. Having a child and getting married, and that's just one thing. But it's the fun. It's a big contrast between but through that, the idea that when you have responsibilities and duties, that somehow is a enslavement upon your individuality, and not actually a way you could get fulfillment and meaning out of it, and actually gives you, where you could get those rootful, roots and those connections and those, things like that nature. And you actually self-actualize, through all these methods. And I think we're going to mention, I'll let you guys talk about your ideas so I don't hog it all off, but so I'll move to Charlemagne.
Cool.
So explain, in your opinion, what are some philosophical underpinnings that have brought about this civilizational nihilism?
Yeah, so I actually wanted to comment on exactly what you were saying right there. In addition to the commodification of everything, which I think is spot on, there's this other problem I've noticed from a philosophical perspective, which is a complete disbelief in all metaphysical concepts whatsoever. So all of these connections, duties, etc., that you just talked about, these aren't physical things that can be, scientifically, empirically observed. They're sort of metaphysical, moral concepts, and people don't really believe in metaphysics anymore. They sort of reject the concept outright if it can't be scientifically measured and calculated. And so I think this really stems from the problem of, atheism and scientism and this obsession with observation generally. It's a very complex set of problems. It's hard to even really say what the root cause of all of this is, but I think the problem of people not believing that these sort of metaphysical concepts of good and evil, bonds, duties, all of this existing, they just reject it outright. And it's very confusing to me because I view these things as real or more real than, a rock or anything I can pick up in the real world. And it sort of confounds me because I think one of the problems this leads to is we sort of aren't speaking with the same grammar as a lot of normies or whatever are using. The concepts we're talking about, I'm not even sure that they can actually comprehend them because it's almost like lacking the language, right? If you try to speak with a foreign person and you don't understand their language, you literally can't communicate with them. And I think it might be the case that people have been trained to only think in certain specific ways outside of metaphysical concepts, that they lack the mechanisms inside their head to actually understand what we mean by these concepts and sort of just view it as, woo-woo magic.
I think what you mean by, I think what we're really trying to get at is the deconstruction of sacred institutions, essentially the demystification of implicit knowledge. Right? In previous, I guess, pre-modern eras, you had these sacred institutions and things that you just did not cross. These lines that you just did not cross. The king is in charge because divine right of kings. The marriage is good because God says such and such in such and such passage. You don't eat this type of meat in the Middle East. Not because it's probably not so good for you and is riddled with disease, but because God or tradition tells you not to. I guess it's what it ultimately comes down to is we're too curious for our own good. Instead of relying on old school traditions, we have to actually examine them for empirically for flaws. I mean, what can tradition actually provide in terms of real physical answers for constructing a modern city? It just doesn't. The language just isn't there. Pretty much everything that's built around us is entirely new. It hasn't been seen before. The level of development, the quantity of products being produced in factories all around the world by different supply chains. Where in any sort of sacred text or local tradition does there exist an actual prescriptive implicit knowledge to how to actually how to deal with this sort of thing? I don't.
What you mentioned there, I find that really interesting. Because it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, that tradition is something that people really, it wasn't rationalized by people. It wasn't scientifically dissected. People kind of just followed it because it was tradition. It was what was passed down from them to them. And kind of in the scientific post-Enlightenment era, we kind of have this tendency to just deconstruct everything and put these. We need to see an idea on a spreadsheet. We need to break it down and put it on a chart and stuff. What I see, I've been actually doing a lot on my channel, and with a lot of the Enlightenment videos. And I spoke about this when I spoke to Greg Johnson. It's that I find that what I've been trying to do is kind of create a terminology to put the value of tradition in terms that somebody who thinks along the lines of pure scientism, pure evidence-based, pure empirically would understand. So what I've tried to do with a few videos, and I didn't even realize I was doing this until a few days ago, but it's like trying to explain why these things actually do facilitate a healthy society, and that they're actually not just they're actually not simply just irrational superstitions that really are meaningless. They actually have a purpose. And like one thing that you had mentioned was childbearing, reproduction. Why is that? Why do people want to do that? Why does it give them? Why does it give people fulfillment? And one of the things is that one of the arguments is that people want to do that because and this is like breaking it down to an empirical level. One of the reasons people want to do that is because as a species, it's required to perpetuate the species that people reproduce, obviously. So in order to get people to do that, in order to get people to care for their child, it has to feel good for them. It has to be something fulfilling for them, because it's healthy in a Darwinian I'm not great on science, but under Darwinian terms, it is actually very good for tradition is actually very good for society because it facilitates healthy Darwinian reproduction.
I don't think the plebes, I mean, just us normal guys who are not social scientists or hard scientists, can actually understand why we do the things we do. When you see someone on Facebook post something about how science says this prescriptive thing should be instituted, they don't actually look at the data. It's coming from some higher authority, and this sort of relationship is kind of inherent in how information is disseminated, right? But the thing is, we don't actually have any sort of, I guess, spiritual or metaphysical authority beyond the scientists and the journalists who actually interpret whatever the hell the scientist says. You know, there might be a small study with a grand total of 10 people who out of the study, it's found that eating chocolate might actually make you thinner. So this is sanctified by the journalist who posts on Facebook in the "I effing love science" article that chocolate makes you thinner.
I fucking hate that Facebook page.
It's garbage, but it's treated as if it is a sacred text, and you should prescriptively live your life as such.
So I want to hit on like what all three of you guys were talking about, because I think I wrote down a few notes while you guys were talking about it to kind of put my mind together, and correct me on, you guys could add on to this, but I think what we're getting at is that, at least to me, so coming from my opinion, is that what happened is, so before I talk, a lot of times, a lot of these fulfillment, we have to be sure we don't like, okay, well, I want to get fulfillment because it's good for me. Sometimes a lot of these fulfillment and authentic type of stuff isn't just what's good that fulfills your life, but it's also just things you do that you guys mentioned it, that it's the things you do that are how do you say it, implicitly. You don't actually have to explicitly go, okay, I'm going to do this to fulfill my life. Sometimes the things you do that are unimplicit are things that give you meaning. So it doesn't have to always just be explicitly you're looking for it. Knowing that also, I think the big problem is that we've deconstructed our entire identity in Western civilization. I think what we got is we're like, well, what's the purpose of, religion? Like, what's the purpose of this community? We've atomized everything. We've made everything a material. What's the most material gain we could get it out of it? And this another part of libertarianism is the idea of like maximizing economic efficiency. So a mother who takes her child out to the park for a walk in the park, and she's sitting down, she's watching her child like run around, and just those moments, they might not be the most economically efficient thing you could do. That's not maximizing the GDP, but those moments that we might not realize it at the time, those are the things that bring you fulfillment and happiness. Not like, and so we've, as we mentioned, commodified everything. We have to make everything material. We have to make everything atomized, and we've become so logical that like we've deconstructed what it means to be alive. And what we've got at is that sometimes the things we do don't have to be logical. For example, I think I mentioned this with on a stream with the aforementioned Forum for Conservatism. I talked about Christmas and why do we bring a Christmas tree in the middle of your living room? Like what's the purpose of it? There doesn't have to be a purpose to it. You don't have to. You just do it because it's a tradition. You just do it. You don't have to have a reason. Not everything has to have a reason. I think that's the thing. It's like, it doesn't have to be like a material thing. It doesn't have to be because someone told you to do it. It's just something you do, and that's what gives you a part of that identity and that authenticity that you don't question it. It doesn't have to be a purpose to it. And I think fundamentally, those are a few things. So as I mentioned, these traditions don't have to be rational. The religious doesn't have to be like, well, because of like what is it, like Occam's razor, I deduced that God is real. That's not how people think. So I think we've deconstructed, as you mentioned, through a logical course of view. Like science could be good if you want to figure out like how to like fix a bacteria, but it's not good. So that's why we might be able to fulfill our basic needs that are materialistically good, but not in the immaterial realm, where that this is why we're lacking in the immaterial, because our mindset where we've atomized and materialized everything is not fit for that.
I use the example when I spoke on Countercurrents Radio, was that you could take the example of, say, this village in Bulgaria, and let's just say this theoretical village. One day a year, they go to this spot in the town and they do this dance and they wear these clothes and they eat this food and they drink this drink or something like that. And you could deconstruct it by saying, well, why does it have to be this part of the town? Why does it have to be these clothes? Why this dance? Why this day? Why this food? Why this? Why that? And the answer is, it's because that's kind of what makes it unique. Because if it wasn't that day, if it wasn't that performance, if it wasn't that food, if it wasn't that thing, well, then it wouldn't be their tradition. And it's not necessarily about it's not necessarily about the what's the right word? It's not about the mundane things they're doing. It's about kind of the things that brought together that really makes them, that town, unique. It makes them kind of a unique group, and a lot of times that's what makes people feel fulfilled, and actually makes people feel like they belong in their little their little town that they grew up in.
I think there actually does need to be some real materialist sort of foundational need for these sort of rituals to actually happen. Like, what's the point of, for instance, May Day in the old pagan traditions? It's the celebration of the coming of spring, the coming of new new vegetation, the growth within growth. Spring is coming. New things are being developed. It actually does come from something very, very real. And then, I guess, why do you have to wear these specific clothes? I mean, it came from somewhere. it obviously comes from some traditional garb that has developed over such and such long period of time. It might have come from some local scarce tradition, so some local scarce resource that is rare, and so this traditional community wants to sanctify this this day by wearing this scarce type of clothing. You want to sanctify the community because that is materially good in the long run for said community. I think there has to have been some original utility to the existence of actual implicit knowledge.
Well, I think that in terms of that becoming a tradition, I think that the it's not necessarily the clothes itself that creates it. Is that has kind of become part of it, in the fact that it's what's now become part of their identity after it being in their tradition for so long. I think one other point is that why culture is, I guess, another kind of materialistic, not materialistic, empirical argument for culture is that culture, much like things like the family, is very healthy for civilizations. It's very healthy for it's very healthy for raising a new generation and getting them to feel a connection to the land that they grew up in, because it makes them feel like they're at home. And I think that the attack on culture is something that is pretty much required for the kind of what the aforementioned commodification of all society. Because one thing that Karl Marx had said about religion was that religion was the opium of the masses, and then he said that it was what's going to it will prevent the supposedly oppressed proletariat from rising up and killing the bourgeoisie. And a lot of Marxists had said that culture was what was preventing Marxist revolution, that the connection that people had in the West to their culture and their identity and their religion and things like that, that was what that's what prevented them from rising up and killing the capitalists who were oppressing them, according to the Marxists. But I guess from the other side, the argument I would make is that culture and that identity really mattered more to them than the supposed materially wealthy workers' utopia that Marx was promising. And that's why, at least in Western Europe, it didn't happen. And I think that's why there's this huge attack on culture. What we call cultural Marxism. It's because in order to actually get people to accept the deconstruction of their society, you have to kind of uproot the things that make them feel like they belong to it.
I think I think a much better sort of analysis of what Marxism is there's the materialistic superstructure in which you go to work, you do the deeds, you produce something, you come home, you consume something. Meanwhile, you're telling yourself this phony story about how you are some very important figure teleologically within the great chain of being, in that you have these great stories about the edification of the old and the sanctity of such and such superstition. But these are all rooted in something materially that is keeping you tethered to the actual superstructure. Marxism is an atheistic view of the world, in which all of these superstitions are just keeping us chained to this corrupt ass system. The best we can actually.
You can finish.
I was going to say the best that the Marxist praxis can actually hope to accomplish is to make the superstructure more fair and to wipe out the oppressive ideologies that are actually preventing fairness from actually being, or not necessarily like equality and fairness, but some sort of justice and self-autonomy.
I actually thought of that concept and kind of did this thought experiment of applying that to woke capitalism of the present day. In that, and I was considering doing a video on it eventually. Maybe I'll save that for June for Pride Month, but or something. But I was going to talk about like the base and superstructure of woke capitalism. In that, it seems like they're creating this inauthentic culture to go along with the with neoliberalism, to go along with the economic system, so it justifies itself under things like social justice politics, and it has this culture that's purely nihilistic, that's entirely geared towards consumption, and it can use things like identity, it can use things that are supposedly quasi-religious, but it all facilitates it towards this an economic system. And it's an interesting concept for that reason, to actually dissect the culture that's really being created today by what we call woke capital, and the system that it's facilitating.
I think I find what's interesting about what you guys were talking about with Marxism and then the current global homo regime is that they both are like, well, you guys are being like, when Clossington was describing kind of like how the Marxian point of view about how this is all, you're being oppressed, but the ruling class is putting a cloak over your eyes with like religion and culture and everything to make you not feel like you're oppressed. But it's kind of like the same thing with this like globalized like capitalist system too, because it's like, well, we need to maximize, because what's eventually going on is that all the world is just a giant shopping mall, and corporations just move beyond to all these different countries just to maximize the amount of profit that they make. And it's the same thing with Marx. Is all about economics. To libertarians, is all about economics. But I think they miss that it's not like their fundamental overview that either culture doesn't matter or it's actually blinding you from what really matters. I think that's fundamentally wrong. Before we move on, I want to get Sellers Lament's opinion on what the philosophical underpinnings of why we see these problems that we see with rootlessness and inauthenticity and all that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys have covered it pretty well, but it just put it basically, we try to rationalize everything, and we kind of suck at rationalizing things. So, like, I don't know, you have, like, Styx Hexenhammer telling me that I need a dozen peer-reviewed studies to tell him that porn's bad, and that there possibly could be something wrong with showing every 10-year-old in your civilization full, hardcore pornography. And if you can't prove objectively that this is definitely a bad thing, then might as well do it. And it's just the loss of any sort of sacred things, or at least most traditional sacred things, things that were like off limits once. It just completely undermines any sort of traditional sense of morality. I mean, we don't. The way it's generally discussed, we don't really have morality anymore. We just have disagreements over what's the best way to maximize output. Like, I remember I mentioned in a video once that, like, Vaush doesn't want to have a moral argument, and I had some communist in the comment section saying, oh no, he loves talking about morality. He constantly says that communism is great because it produces the best utilitarian outcome. And like, no, that's my fucking I shouldn't swear. That's my point, you idiot. That's the whole point, is that, like, oh, communism's good because it produces more things. That's the entire problem with materialism.
Yeah, I think. No,
it's like, I mean, I think abortion is the best example of this. Where you constantly have leftists saying that, like, oh no, abortion's fine because actually, don't you know that abortion rates are lower in countries that have legal abortion, and the basis for those claims is really poor to begin with. I don't think that's a true statement. But even if that was the case, the reasons abortion is bad is because it's bad to murder babies. I don't care about you trying to maximize, like, abortion rates. I care about babies not being murdered. And it's not about, like, trying to hit the dials perfectly to get the best output.
Yeah, I was gonna. Sorry if I bring it up again, but I was gonna also go back to the film Wall-E, which I looked at on my channel. A point that I had made in the video is that the Marxist critique of capitalism doesn't make sense in this film because it does portray a capitalistic society, a post-scarcity capitalistic society. And I saw this one leftist review of Wall-E, and it was really poor. And I might actually need to do like a response video to it. And because what he said was it was a critique of capitalism, and that's it in a way it is, but it's a critique of capitalism from the right, because in the society portrayed in Wall-E, Marxism wouldn't make sense because Marxism, its critique of capitalism is that it makes people poor and a small group of people rich. But if capitalism is able to actually fulfill all of people's physiological needs, but they are really still living but they really are still living a spiritually dead life, then I definitely think that that the utilitarian mindset really doesn't answer a lot of the questions that people want answers to. It doesn't. Utilitarianism can't provide people with a fulfilling life. It can provide them with material wealth, but it can't provide them with a life that's actually fulfilling.
I think the main split between what we're talking about and what they are talking about is something like a split between deontological and consequentialist philosophical arguments. In terms of deontologically, what are the virtue ethics behind such and such decision, where the decision itself is moral or immoral, irrespective of its consequences, as opposed to consequential, where the morality of the individual decision doesn't actually matter. All that actually matters is the consequences of said decision. I really don't know how to actually get onto a deontological debate when you don't actually have any sort of virtue rooted in anything beyond the virtue of something is good for such and such purpose. I mean, if you wanted to talk to a utilitarian about something like abortion, you have to actually explain you have to actually figure out what is actually useful. Like is the demystification of the sanctity of the unborn actually useful in the long run morally? I mean, you could actually fight that fight, but you have to come in with the underpinning morality that individual life does not matter. All that matters is the lives of everyone else who have to deal with you. I don't know, something like that.
So we're gonna move to now that we've talked basically what the problems we see, why these problems exist. Let's move on to a bit more of a hopeful topic and talk about the fundamental question of this live stream, which is, what is the authentic life? We talked about all the inconsistencies and the clownish ways that our modern world operates and all the problems that come under it. So what is the authentic life? How does one come about living a life where they feel fulfilled, where they self-actualize, where they feel like what they're living is real? It's not just this, they don't just exist in it. So I'm going to give everyone, as much time as they need to explain in their own words, their own authentic life, like what their views on this question is. And I'll start with Endeavour.
I'd say in simple terms, what would lead to an authentic life is, first of all, a life lived for something bigger than oneself. So an idea, a conception of life that something eternal exists, and that your life is really only part of a longer stream of existence. And that you should really be living for something that is bigger than you. And then I'd also say life in accordance to the natural order. So I do believe that there is kind of a natural order and a natural hierarchical order that human societies really naturally develop into. And I'd say a life in accordance to that is one that generally tends to be a more authentic life.
All right. What about you, Charlemagne?
I like to approach this, I guess, carefully and incrementally. I think, a lot of people express this desire, I guess, to jump headfirst into, say, like a trad lifestyle. But I think that's a very difficult thing to do. Let's say you start lifting weights or something. You're not just going to start lifting the heaviest thing you could possibly go for, right? You want to approach this in a way that's actually going to be compatible long term with reaching some ideal state that you're aiming for. So, to bring up a personal example again, one of the things I like to do is gardening. Basically each year I've sort of extended my space, and this kind of relates to what we're talking about previously in terms of why I'm doing this, right? One of the reasons is definitely because, I think it's a bit of a traditional thing to do, but it's not, I don't have some sort of rationalization to it in terms of the material benefits, right? You have to come up with something you can do that you enjoy, and maybe it does have a few material benefits, right? But in the analysis of it, I'm not going to, if you compare the time invested compared to the amount of, vegetables and whatnot I'm actually going to get out of it, it's a complete waste of time, right? So obviously there's something more going on there. And if you can find things like that, small things that don't necessarily take a lot of time, you can sort of build a foundation for yourself to try and progress towards a more authentic lifestyle in small steps that are actually measurable and accomplishable. And I think this is a really good path for people to set themselves on. You need to find some small hobby-like endeavor that you can actually embark on that's going to help you progress towards whatever your authentic vision is. And I think you do need to, let's say 10 or 20 years in the future, what does your authentic life look like? What are you trying to approach? And then just pick one or two things in that vision that you can accomplish now, that you can build on now, that's actually going to provide you with a foundation in order to get there.
Awesome. And I really love these explanations, because I think it's really important that people understand that there is ways, even in a world where it's very hard to say, do kind of, things that we would ascribe like families and, getting, it might be hard to maybe make a family or maybe go out to make a community or there's a lot of things you could do even in a modern world that could give you fulfillment. I'm really glad we're bringing it all up. I'm going to go to Clossington now.
I know we're all gamers here, but whatever you do, go outside, get connected to the actual mechanics, the actual natural chain of life. Tether yourself to the actual great chain of being. Be a proper Nietzschean Ubermensch Chad, but don't do it in a cynical kind of way. I see a lot of the prescriptions you guys have been offering are very individualistic, and from sort of an Uncle Ted perspective, these surrogate goals aren't exactly authentic. I think instead of creating, I guess, hobbies to challenge yourself, you actually have something. The transcendent actually comes from waking up the sheeple, actually organizing and growing things with other people in the community rather than just by yourself. I know we're all gamers and neats, but whatever you do it with friends and family. Create an actual community. Revolt against the modern world by creating a sort of collective direct action against it. Create value in your own communities, people.
100%.
I prescribe that by actually creating something, I guess, economically real. You have to do activities with in order to actually get back to the wheat fields, and in order to actually have the trad wife, you have to support the trad wife in the wheat fields.
Um,
Yeah, I'll let Settlers Lament go before I respond.
Yeah, I mean, I mostly agree with that. But yeah, it is. I guess to take a phrase that Dave uses a lot to sort of describe what Clossington was talking about, is we need to build thick communities, where we really feel like we're invested in each other. And I know the like clean your room stuff is cringe, but it is actually kind of true. You need to sort yourself out, if you do want to, improve the world. And yeah, so I don't know, that's basically it.
Yeah, one of the things that we mentioned is the atomization. So and of course, this is what everyone is feeling now with the lockdown, being stuck in your room for like 18 hours a day or something like that. I think that one thing that for me at least was a huge improvement, and it might sound mundane, but it actually is really useful, is to just prioritize social interactions above anything that's individualistic. So unless that's maybe like something like a passion project, but even then, what I find is like find a few nights a week that you're going to go visit someone outside of your household, be it a group of people or a friend, or even some people that you don't know. That's just it. To break down the atomization, it's so important to prioritize your social life. I think a great app to do this with is one called Couchsurfing. And now I know it sounds like
I use it. I use it when I travel.
Yeah. What you can do with that site, and it was originally for like kind of like Airbnb, but what it actually is now is it's a social site. It's not a dating site. But what you do is you can find either like individual friends in a city that you're in, or in your own city they have like different events. So there's this one like weekly thing that before the lockdown I'd always go to, and there'd be like a couple dozen people there that I'd know that would go there every week, and every week you'd meet somebody new, and it's just that's just something that's so lost today. It's something that is just basic community like that. And I know that in the dissident right, and we talk about nationalism and national pride and stuff like that, and trust me, I mean, yeah, that stuff's all good, but even it doesn't have to be that like explicitly political. It can just be really just having a group of people who are even just normies that you prioritize yourself spending time with on a regular basis. That, to me at least, is something that I felt myself missing out for a very long time, and I find myself again. It's something with the lockdown. I'm not to get into the question of that, but whether or not it's because I don't want to bring it up here, but it's something that like that's the one thing I miss the most. It's just that the feeling of being alone, really.
I've actually used the app you were talking about, Couchsurfing. I was visiting an online friend of mine from Washington State, and we met up in San Diego, California. And we like skydived and visited like the zoo there, and it was like and what so usually, and we're not like rich, so we use Couchsurfing. And what's so awesome is like, and this might sound kind of strange, like stranger danger, right? But like basically these people in the city who like the locals there, they allow you to stay at their homes for free. And you just don't. They have their own rules and everything you have to follow. But like besides that, you could just stay at this local person's house, this person you've never met, and they could show you the places where like a tourist wouldn't necessarily wouldn't necessarily go to, and you actually could go with other. They could show you like the nooks and crannies of things that you might not get that if you just visit it and just for in a touristy fashion. So I understand where you're actually coming from with the with this Couchsurfing. It's actually really fun because you actually get to spend time with people who you might have not met with in a different fashion. So I definitely endorse Couchsurfing. So in terms of my, I think there's two ways I'm going to approach this. One is through a civilizational lens, and one through a personal lens. Personal lens I could give more a testament to. The civilizational one I'll go first with, because I think it's a bit more philosophical. The thing with, I think we've all kind of touched on it in one way or the other, but again, it's basically trying to find, I think, to bring back the sense of fulfillment, that to bring about a civilization that feels like we're actually a part of it, not that something that enslaves us. We need to bring about our place in it. We need to know our place in this world. I think that's a big thing. I think we need to think more in transcendental terms. Now, I understand that, if you're an atheist, right, like I was back in the day, it's very hard to become religious again. It has to go through a faith process. And, that's the thing, is that fundamentally it's on your initiative to believe in that transcendental purpose, because then that gives you a world even beyond. Oh, hello? Yeah,
we can hear you.
Oh, hello. Oh, okay, got it. So something that brings beyond the interruption. Okay, hold up. Let me get back to where I was. So you have to find your role in this, where you actually fit in, where that you're a puzzle piece that fits into the grander scheme of things. What you are, your role, what to do, you don't have to, question everything. Your place, the right, what's right and wrong. We know what to do. And I think that's something that we're missing in broader civilizational aspects. We also have to bring back the sense of civilization. We mentioned it even earlier in the stream. We're not just atomized individuals. We are people who thrive with people around us, and with friends and family and community and the nation at large. We might, let's say you're an Englishman. Okay, that gives you an identity, and then your community. Maybe you're a Manchester person, and then beyond that, into your little community within that, Northern England type of community, and then smaller than that is like family. So all these things is. It's like an organic hierarchy in a way that gives about your fulfillment in a communal sense. So it's not just, we have to look past, material, what's the most material, what's the most, logical and rational, because you could rationalize away your entire existence. And which is what has done in the civilizational aspect. I think having order and certainty and identity and having standards, I think it's the immaterial things, a home you could call your own, a family, a transcendental purpose. All these things are what make life beautiful. And we're trying to fill our hearts up with like video games and porn and whatnot. But fundamentally, it's the little things that matter. And it's also the big immaterial things that matter. And we've lost those things because we rationalize them away, and we are focusing on the things that have led us astray from those. So I think that's in a civilizational aspect. Now, into a personal aspect, I made a video on how you defeat nihilism. There's a few things, in my opinion. Here's what you have to do. First thing, you have to have a long-term goal that you're striving towards. Not just, you're shuffling day by day. A long-term goal. What is it that you're fighting towards? That goal might change. The path to get to that goal might change, but you have to have a long-term. With the Twitter user Orwell and Good, he had he made a book on high time preferences, which I recommend you guys check out. But basically, when you think about it in long term, civilizations last long, and you personally last longer when you think in terms of decades and years instead of, well, what's the best thing I could do right now? You have to, and and another thing is always seek self-fulfillment, or self improvement, not self-fulfillment. Sorry, improvement. Now, what does that mean? Like Charlemagne said, he works on his little garden. Now, is there a purpose to it? Is it maximizing economic efficiency? No, but it's something he loves to do, and it gives. He could probably go on explaining the little intrinsic ways of gardening that makes it a beautiful thing. And we all have our own ways, either maybe you're mastering a language or working out, or maybe improving yourself on a, studying up on a topic, just improve yourself, like, and actually setting yourself with some standards. And then lastly is, these are the cliche things, but, obviously I would recommend, like, go, as Clossington said, go out into nature, take, at least once a week, go out and just, take in the fresh air. And, I would recommend, maybe praying or meditating, whichever one you prefer, just to clear out your mind. I would recommend, obviously eat well, work out often, sleep enough. And then, also try to find a balance in everything, balance your work and life, balance, your things that fulfill like a project of yours, and then also a communal thing as well. So those are just my spiel on both a civilizational way we could defeat this nihilism, and then a personal way we could actually live an authentic life that's not dripped in nihilism. So that's my opinion. What happened to Endeavour?
One, he's backstage, so he needs to
Oh.
get back in.
Hello. Yeah, so
Hello.
I cut out for a while. What I don't know. I missed the last few minutes. Sorry about that. But what I was gonna say was that we talked earlier about consumerism and about the problem of everything being commodified. And one thing that I found for myself is that in order to live a more authentic life, don't be a consumer. And the best way to do that is you can find these things, that a lot of these things that we mentioned, things like for Charlemagne, gardening, or going to meeting up with friends, or even meeting new individuals, going to these these couch surfing gatherings that I mentioned earlier, or you mentioned like learning a language or going out in nature. One thing that all these have in common is that they're all essentially free or very cheap, and not only can you save a lot of money by cutting yourself out of the consumption cycle, I feel like you just get so much more value out of all of these, out of kind of transitioning away from just being a consumer who buys, the next Call of Duty game or every year, or buying a new iPhone every 6 months, or a new pair of Air Jordans or something like that. A less consumeristic, more authentic lifestyle. It not only can you save money, but it's more fulfilling. So there's just so many ways that you can get out of that. You can get out of that consumer cycle. I mean, like for me, for example, I don't really buy video games anymore. I don't really, not that I think everyone that plays them is, not that I think there's like anything wrong with playing it, but you certainly shouldn't become addicted. I just realized like I haven't bought a new pair of shoes in the last 3 years. And I'm basically the worst consumer in the world. Like, I buy my clothes from this street market, which sells them for like a third of the price of all the retail stores. And I just feel that like you can make so much, you can experience so much more when you get out of the cycle of just consumption.
I think one of the common threads in the last 20 minutes of our discussion is really transcending the individual and going back and integrating yourself into the community. And as you mentioned, this also is a very cheap thing to do. It doesn't even cost your actual resources. Like we were discussing before the stream began, I just got back from a really long bike ride with my family. We were out for like 3 hours, and it only costed us like, $2 in gas or something to get out to where we were going, right? And you can integrate yourself with people close to you. You can enjoy yourself. You can, there's so many benefits to it, physical fitness, right? Of just doing something like that, and it costs no money virtually. And
you can become like an expert on some era of history you really like. You could become an expert. You could read all this philosophy you like. You can learn some skill. You can do that. Almost all of that is free. The internet, I think, is one thing that really has atomized people, but it also can be used as a resource for good. It can be used as a resource to facilitate more a better social life if you use it correctly. It can be used to gain a lot more knowledge and skills. You know, there's a lot of problems caused by the surpluses of our time, but you know, there is ways that you can use them to your advantage.
Mm-hmm.
So, before we move on to the last topic of the stream, do you guys want to add anything else that you want to, chip in on, what exactly it means to live authentically and fulfillment, and anything else you guys want to add on to that? This is open.
Unplug from the machine, Kings.
Yeah.
The natural habit of, I guess, I mean, this is kind of a Marxist critique of consumerism, but the natural inclination of capitalism is to expand and to provide services for a financial cost that would have otherwise been either free or organic to communities. So whatever you do it without using some intermediary, like a Silicon Valley app, or a or some sort of community activity based around a service.
Mm-hmm.
Like what I mean is basing your identity around something like, I mean, I'm guilty of this, but something like Warhammer 40K or cults of consumer products like gaming is a bad idea. Something more organic, like you have to actually be there with a person to actually have something like a real tethered relationship with them. Like all of these parasocial relationships online are great and feel kind of real, but in the end you're just sitting you're sitting at some computer somewhere. Real human interaction is what matters. So it's difficult right now with the coronavirus, but once that is up, actually go out and engage with real people.
Yeah, and one of the rules I follow in this respect, especially being an introvert, is just always say yes when people want to hang out with you. Obviously there are occasions where you might actually have something really important to do, but don't be a neat and try and rationalize why you should stay home and do whatever by yourself, right? Anytime my friends want to hang out, even if there's something I want to work on or read or whatever, I basically always say yes. And this is just something you should do, and it's going to get you out of your little individualistic cave that you might be trapped in, and help you socialize with real people. So just avoid this process where you're questioning whether or not you should just stay inside and consume. And the other thing, kind of on what Clossington said there, is just stop watching these Netflix shows and all of this other garbage. I just refuse to watch these things anymore. People will recommend this stuff to me, and I don't want to engage with this stuff because I think it kind of relates to what you're saying, because it's a sort of middleman vector to building some sort of connection with people, where you're just using some highly produced and propagandistic nonsense in place of actual relations with people, where you just talk about this, superhero show or whatever, as opposed to actually talking about something authentic with people. So just unplug from all of this stuff being jammed into your face.
Yeah, I made an entire video on the Marvel series and why they're particularly bad. And it's not just that they're low quality films; it's that they're essentially a product that's designed to for the atomized, inauthentic, materialistic society that we live in today. And I just refuse to watch them because, there's vacuous propaganda with a big budget, and I like Charlemagne had mentioned, when you can actually get your relationships can be so much more engaging if you actually are interesting yourself. So don't don't be someone who just talks about like Marvel or I don't know, Call of Duty or something like that, or somebody who just is a sarcastic ass all the time. I find like you can make so much more fulfilling relationships when you actually have interesting things in your life that you can discuss, things like maybe your gardening or your walks outdoor, or the different books you read and stuff like that. You can make your relationships better based on the way that you spend your alone time, I think.
For sure, what Charlemagne said, I actually really needed that advice, Charlemagne. Thanks. I remember at the beginning, there was this like after school after this college program about for my ROTC program that they offered me to join, and I'm like, I like mumbled around and said no. And I'm like, I still kick, but I'm like, why did I say no? Like, I could have just gone. Like, I mean, and I really needed that someone saying that. Thanks, Charlemagne.
Awesome.
So we're gonna.
I was gonna make this one.
Yeah.
There's something very, very pernicious about commodified dissent. Like when you see when you watch shows like Black Mirror, which rant about the evils of the TV screen, but it is in and of itself a form of commodified dissent on the oppressive TV screen. I don't know. There are a lot of these sort of things, like cynical TV shows like Rick and Morty, that say that we have protagonists in absolute misery, like Rick Sanchez, who lives this nihilistic, materialistic existence and wallows in pain, and rants about how nothing actually matters. But then you keep on watching it because my anti-hero. Ironically, in Rick and Morty, there's an episode on I think it's Rick Lantis, where there's this candy bar that essentially gives you the pleasure of living an authentic life as a carpenter, so that you don't actually have to. I don't know. What if you don't fall into the trap of using media to actually reinforce the status quo? Avoid it.
Yep, I agree. Yeah, it's kind of like I think one thing I meant before. I'm going to move on to the last topic after this, but I think, as you mentioned, I think a lot of people are trying to build off like, oh, everything sucks, and then like we're all being controlled by the system. Well, and then like they become like the very things that they are complaining about. So it's kind of like it's kind of being a little bit of hypocritical in that sense. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is, as we know what the authentic life is, or at least our own ways of how we could bring it about, the problems that the modern world have. Knowing this, what is in a political sphere, and when we talk about philosophy and politics, and what is the right wings or NRX's view on trying to bring about a society and the values into that society where human beings could be fulfilled and happy and live authentically?
One thing I can point out is kind of my political journey and why I kind of arrived where I did. And something that was vital towards that was kind of the transitional period for me of like 2016, 2017. I think a lot what you see with a lot of our guys in our sphere is that we used to be fans of Sargon. We used to be fans of the skeptic community, as they used to be called. And the reason we liked them was because I think it was kind of a release valve. It was a way for you're just getting sick of the whole like SJW feminists getting out of hand and telling you're an awful person. Then you find this guy on the internet who's beating the crap, virtually tearing them down and owning them and stuff like that. And for a while it was funny, but I think what really was the break for me away from that, and I'd say very vital to me getting to the position I got to now, was that eventually I started to bring on more right-wing ideas, and this skeptic crowd, as they were called, they then started to try to direct their attention towards the far right, like Kraut and Tea, if you remember that debacle from a few years ago, and they tried to apply the same, like, oh, look at these are right-wing SJWs, oh, they're so stupid, they care so much about skin color or something like that. And Of course, a lot of it was just straw man's. But what broke me away from that was that at the end of the day, I didn't just want someone who was going to be this nihilist who just ironically scoffs at any kind of meaning, or anyone that actually has a vision for the world. Of course, with the left, it's a bad one, but anyone who has a vision for the world which they actually want to advance. And that's when I just had enough of. I had enough of classic liberalism. I had enough of civic nationalism. I had enough of that entire nihilistic skeptic crowd, and I actually wanted something that was serious, and I actually wanted something that was I actually kind of wanted a cause that you could unironically work towards. And I'd say that for a lot of people, that is the appeal of the dissident right. I think it's actually a political body. It's a political movement that's not entire. That's first of all, it's one that actually believes in principles, but one from the right that's not entirely. It's one from the right that's not entirely materialistic. Because I've mentioned before that the left seems to have a religious fervor around egalitarianism, and I think that having a almost religious fervor around right-wing ideas, around pro-civilizational ideas, around ideas that bring about a more authentic life. I'd say that that's the real appeal of a reactionary movement.
I'll bring it over to Charlemagne to add on to that, or expand, or add his own thoughts.
So in terms of how neo-reaction relates to what we've been talking about, and authenticity in particular, I actually think the inaugural post of Unqualified Reservations, the formalism post, actually relates to this quite a bit, as the whole idea of Moldbug's formalism is to basically put power in the hands of who it authentically is actually in. I think neo-reaction in general is sort of very much about viewing the world in terms of what's real, what things are actually like. And I think that actually relates very much to this topic of authenticity. And I guess one of the overall ideas of, I think, neo-reaction generally is just viewing everything in a very realistic manner, be that politics in a sort of Machiavellian lens, or economics in terms of incentives. I think these ideas are very much all interrelated to each other.
I'll bring it over to Clossington.
In terms of actual praxis, there are, I guess, two major avenues you could go down. There's the individualist and collectivist route, both of which need to actually occur for anything real to happen. There's, of course, individual virtue, do it yourself, clean up your room, bucko. But there's also collective action and not being LARPy about it. In terms of actually what you need to do in your own life, live out your values, and from there you can actually have something of a bottom-up impact on your community. But in terms of an actual collective action thing, actually start setting up your own communities. Start up your own little clubs based around doing something together. Environmental and exercise sort of clubs are great. I'm part of something of a kayaking club. Go out, bike with your buddies. In terms of actual political solutions, that's a little bit more dicey. We're much more on the end in terms of content creators. We're on the end of actually winning over hearts and minds, and inspiring other people to look at alternatives to the status quo. And by that I mean, instead of I guess doing what the alt-right did and commodify something like whiteness or these very trivial trivial novelties, you have to fully embody what you want to actually happen. you need to actually act like a proper person, clean your room, dress nicely, grow your own wheat fields, and then get the boys together to have a pint at the bar afterwards, and from there you can start having a discussion about community direct action and NRX solutions like the antiversity. So I want something of a holistic solution to the atomization issue.
You've kind of stole my thunder there, Clossington. That was
Oh,
basically
no.
almost everything. I'll let Lament go next.
I don't really have anything else to add, to be honest.
Yeah, I Clossington, you took everything. But no, you all very eloquently and beautifully. To me, I think to stick basically what Clossington said. I fundamentally, change isn't gonna happen in your you're not gonna vote for the right party. That's not gonna change your life. Voting for the right people is fundamentally, you could get ideas from us. You might hear a lot from all of us, and you might be like, oh, that maybe I'm good now. Fundamentally, if you're gonna live an authentic, fulfilled life, it's gonna be up to you and you forming those roots and building those hobbies and doing all those things to get doing all the things we prescribed. Fundamentally, we're not going to be saviors. We're not going to, any political movement is going to save you. Fundamentally, it's going to be you yourself who's going to save yourself. I think
it was actually Molebug who said it himself, that he did not want to be a cult leader.
Yeah.
So you don't. Hell, don't listen. I'm just a college student. So but I just have my own life experiences and I'm just relaying it, and fundamentally, just giving. And we're all here. We all kind of, I guess, in the civilization that we live in, we all experience that there's something wrong, and we want to bring about change, but fundamentally, we as we discussed throughout this whole stream, we talked about ways we could bring about that authenticity, that meaning, that fulfillment. But at the end of the day, the people who are going to be prescribing it is going to be the people who want to. And that's kind of what I want to say.
That's a beautiful way out of the black pill mentality, realizing that it's really within your own will to get out of this trap. The modern world, it can't force you to be miserable. And I would say Seneca, Aurelius are good reading, of course, in this area if you're looking for some intellectual backing to this idea in terms of stoicism. But and what Clossington said too in terms of bottom up. Obviously, all of this stuff has to start with you at the individual level, but we do ultimately need to go from the bottom up into some sort of community and not just stay at this individual level in terms of what we're doing.
I think the purpose of what we're doing right now is to provide a lexicon for future leaders to start IRL organizing or something like that. I've learned a lot of very, very important and useful terminology from Distributist, for example, on magic words, on my introduction to Molebug, an introduction to actual useful praxis rather than the movements of fools. So what we are right here, right now doing is saying or expressing what everybody deep down kind of feels so that something real can actually come about. I don't know if any of you guys want to start your own political party or start up or run for some sort of office, but I don't know. I'd vote for you guys.
That's pretty wholesome, my dude. So, do you guys have anything you guys want to add to that?
Well, one thing I will say is that that's something I like to remind people is the reason I don't like now, to be honest, I haven't even read all of Evola, but the reason I don't like the whole kind of revolt against the modern world, like wife in the cornfield with 7 kids it's fundamentally not attainable in the modern world. Everyone is scarred by modernity to some extent. And what I always like to avoid the LARP, and I think that a lot of the things we mentioned here are things that you can do. It's stuff that you can easily do, and it's not going to turn you into some kind of Viking warrior. It's not going to turn you into some Ubermensch, but really, in terms of actually beating modernity, it really is not about it's not about restoring the cornfield. It's not cornfield nationalism. Let's just say what we're trying to get at is to find certain things that give your life more fulfillment, really. And then it has to be something grounded in reality, really. So I always think, just look for the small things that you can do, and they're out there. If you have the pie in the sky vision of cornfield nationalism, it's not going to happen. But then if you kind of just look for those small things you can do, that's quite easy, I think.
To leave on I won't leave right away, but for my final thought, I'm going to leave on a little bit of a white pill. If you want to achieve something in your life, 80% of it is mental. It's all based on your own mind, on if you want it. And, you might fall down 8, 9, 10 times. There might be you might be lost once in a while. But if you keep that objective that you want, if you want a family, if you want to start doing this hobby or this thing to give your life and be part of, there's a lot, as we mentioned throughout the stream, there is very easy ways and cheap ways to actually gain a sense of fulfillment and identity and authenticity to it. And it's all going to be, and it is possible, my guys, it is possible. We're all going to make it out of this if we just believe and keep on fighting. And, it might seem blackpilling looking at our current society, but we could get out of it, my dudes. We could live beautiful, fulfilled, happy lives. And the white pill is that it is in our hands to achieve such a thing. So just leaving on a white pill there.
Nice. There's
Good.
a lot of big chungus energy in this
Big
discussion.
chungus.
Go out into the world, see the chungus on the horizon, and make some real connections.
The whole point of Evelyn's Ride the Tiger is to tell aristocrats of the soul to rise above modernity, I guess, and be a proper Nietzschean Ubermensch. I mean, it's hopeful, but actually living it out is extremely difficult. It'll take a whole lot of work. And you don't, it starts with putting down the computer, going outside and making a difference, and actually doing a really, really difficult assessment of who and what you are. And then from there, figuring out what you can do and realizing that everything is in front of you. You can do a whole lot. You can network with whoever you want if you have the right tools. And it's difficult. There are a lot of temptations out there. The internet, it provides a whole lot of tools and a whole lot of instruction for doing something constructive. But first, you have to avoid the porn. You have to avoid doing 12 more rounds of Tetris. And you have to avoid the dopamine traps. To just rise above, my kings.
Yes.
Be the big chungus.
Revolt against the modern world. Don't watch Marvel.
Well, guys, I love you all in a friendly, brotherly way. You guys are awesome, and I love all my everyone in the chat. You guys are amazing. We're all gonna make it through, my guys. So I'm gonna end the stream. So aim high, wander on from America with Russian love. All right.